Welcome to your Get That Nugget for GCSE Maths. Today we will be concentrating on giving you a framework to answer grade 3 area of a circle questions. It's all about finding the area of a circle, bit of application, that sort of thing. And please note, as always, this session is to complement your lessons with the teachers. It is not to replace them in any way. So without further ado, let's have a little look at some of these area of circle questions. I've gone straight in. This is one of those topics that you do need to remember your formula to work out the area of a circle. So if you've forgotten it, it's one of those you just need to try and remember, because you have to then apply it to the question. If you can't remember the formula, then it's very difficult as to the point of where you get started. So the first thing I'm going to write down for you is area of a circle. You would do pi times the radius squared. That is how you work out the area of a circle. Pi, that's just a symbol we use to represent the number. The number goes on forever, so we just want to use a symbol. We don't want to write every single digit. And the radius squared is one of the dimensions of the circle. So let's look at this question. The way I would always start these questions is write down the information that you have. So in this question, I'm asked to calculate the area of it. The only bit of information I've got is this. I need to determine, there are two key parts to a circle for these questions, is that the radius, is that the diameter? Now, we should know that the radius is halfway across. So for this question, I know that I have a radius of 4 centimeters. So I'm going to write that down. So for the area of a circle, I need to do pi times radius squared. The only value I need is the radius, which I know is 4. So if I'm going to work out this question, all I'm going to do is I'm going to go, right, pi times my radius, which I know is 4, and I'm going to write pi times 4 squared. Now, in terms of popping that into a calculator, all we'd need to do is grab our symbol for pi, which I'll just demonstrate here. So we've got it. So turn my calculator on. There are obviously different models, but for me, I can see pi. It's that yellow symbol down there, which means I need to press shift to get that symbol. And then I know I need to multiply that by 4 squared. So times 4 and then squared. And that's what I'm going to do. My calculator is going to give me an answer. So unless the question specifies, it might say leave your answer in terms of pi. If it says leave it in terms of pi, that's all it wants. What's the number in front of the pi? So the answer would be 16 pi. And because it's an area question, I've got a unit of centimeters, so it would be centimeters squared. So that would be perfectly acceptable if it asks for that. Or it may want my answer as a decimal. It's calculator paper, it normally would. And again, to convert it into a decimal, I'm going to press this question. You often get lots of decimal places. So again, unless it's specified, I would go to 2 decimal places. So I'm going to look at the 6, because that's the second decimal place. What does the 5 do to the 6? Well, it rounds it up. So the 6 becomes a 7. So I would write 50.27 and always put my units of centimeters squared. So if it doesn't specify about putting your answer in terms of pi, then always go with the decimal and round according to the question. Okay, so 50.27, job done. Nice and straightforward on that one. And then what we'll do is we'll go down to the next question. So same process. This question wants me to work out the area of a circle. Now you'll see I'm going to continue to write what is the formula, just to remind myself. So I know the area is going to be pi times radius squared. That's what I want to apply. Now, as the previous question I mentioned, what's the information in the question that I've got? Well, the only bit of information is this dimension, this length. Well, I can see that's not the same as the one before, because this one goes all the way across, which means for this question, I'm told the diameter is 6 meters. So I know the diameter for this one. Now, if I want to apply the area of a circle, I need to know what the radius is. Well, we should be pretty clear that the radius is from the edge to the center. So it's going to be half of whatever the diameter is, which is why I think it's always useful to write it out, because it gets in your mind to sort of sense check, have I got the right value? So the radius is half the diameter. Well, half of 6 is 3. I now have my radius, nice and clear. So I'm going to now pop the area formula in, which is pi times my radius squared. Well, we know the radius is 3. So that's the calculation I'm going to do in my calculator. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to 2 decimal places. So very similar to before. I'm going to press shift. I'm going to go down to my symbol for pi. And this time my radius is 3. So it's 3 squared. and then I press equals. It's going to give me in terms of pi, but I don't want it in terms of pi. It's not been specified. So I'm going to press SD. I'm going to think about, right, this question. I'm going to go to 2 decimal places. So I can see that 7's the second decimal place. The 4 won't change the 7. So that's going to stay as 28.27. Now I will just add in, if you're not too confident with your rounding, 28.27, and my units for the question were meters. Because it's area, it's meters squared. If you're not too confident with your rounding, and sometimes you round it up when you shouldn't, or you forget to, write out the digits that you have on the calculator, write them nice and clear on your answer, and then do your rounded answer below that. So I'll show you what I mean in question 3, just to give you an idea, because sometimes you get the benefit of the doubt by showing the question so you've done the process correctly. But I'm happy, it's a 4, so it won't change the 7. Okay, and then there are some times when we get questions that require us to do a little bit of work in terms of there's no image, I've got nothing at all. So I've got a circle with an area of 65 centimeters squared, and the question says, what is the radius of the circle? Well, the only thing I know here is the area of the circle. Now, I know that the formula for the area of a circle is pi times radius squared. That's what I know. Now, the question wants me to determine what's the radius. So what number do I square and multiply by pi to give me an area of 65? So I know the area is 65. So how I do these questions is I would write out the information I've got, which is pi times radius squared. So I need to work out what the radius is. If you look here, I'm multiplying by pi. Well, actually, if I'm going to start to think about what did I do to get there, well, I need to do the inverse or the reverse of that. Well, what's the opposite of multiplying something by pi? Well, that would be dividing by pi. Now, what I do is I write that on both sides, because what I'm effectively doing is I'm working backwards. I'm dividing by pi, so that's going to eliminate this part. Now, you might go, well, you can't divide by pi. Remember, it's just a number. So if I write in my calculator, I've got 65, and we're going to work backwards. So I want to divide it by pi. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide it by pi. It's just a number. And I'll get a really long decimal most of the time. Now, for this, don't do any rounding just yet, because we haven't got to our answer. This is just the first step of the working. So what I would advise to do for these questions is, having done 65 divided by pi, on my calculator, I got an answer of 20.69014. And then that equals, so I haven't done any rounding here just yet. Well, I've divided, not the inverse of multiplying by pi is divide. So that's left me with the radius squared. So something squared gives me this answer. So I need to think about, okay, well, what's the inverse of squaring something? Because I'm working backwards. Well, hopefully we know the opposite, or the inverse of squaring, is what we call square root. So what you would do is you would square root that answer. And then when you square root it, what you notice I've done is I haven't changed my calculator. So I've not done anything here. So what we can do is we can do something called the square root of my answer, and it will square root the number that was previously in there. Or we can square root and just rewrite these digits because we didn't round them. When I press equals, I get 4.548. So I've got here an answer of 4.54864, and that is my radius, because what I've done is I did the square root. Now, what I said for the prior question is I haven't done the rounding just yet. So I've written all the values out. Now I'm going to round it. So if I go to 2 decimal places, what does the 8 do to the 4? Well, it should round it up. So the 4 becomes a 5, which means I'm going to write an answer of 4.55, and that is going to be my radius. Now, if you ever need to check to make sure you've done the right process, we could always pop this back into that formula. So by that, I mean, I've got pi. I've said that I think the radius should be 4.55. So if I times that by 4.55, and remember we need to square that. So if I square that, I'm hoping I get an area of 65. Press equals, press SD, 65.03. So I'm ever so slightly out, but again, we rounded our final answer. So I'm happy that 65.03 has got me to the right process. I put my value back in to make sure that I'm happy with the value I've got. So that's how we would do a sort of a reverse operation. Not timesing by pi, we're going to divide, and then we would find the square root. So have a look at those notes again if you need to, because it's a little bit trickier. And then sometimes they give us these sorts of questions, which at first glance look awful. So a circle is enclosed by a square. Each side of the square measures 12 centimeters. Find the area of the shaded region. So what I would do here is I would just write the values I've got. Well, if it's a square, every side must be the same. So I've got 12 and 12. So I've basically got a square and I'm cutting a circle out of it. That's effectively what I'm doing. So I think the first thing I would do is go, well, actually, can I find the area of the square? Well, area of a square is just length times width. So that's just going to be 12 times 12, which is going to give me 144 centimeters squared. But that would be the entire square. I only want the shaded bit. So in effect, I want to find out what the area of a circle is. So we know the area of a circle is going to be pi times radius squared. What we don't know is what the radius of the circle is. But actually, we know that the square is 12, which means that length all the way across must be 12. Which means for this question, I know the diameter of my circle is 12 because that's got to be the length of the square. Which means if the diameter is 12, the radius must be 6 because that's going to be halfway across. Which means actually all the information I needed was this 12. So I can go pi multiplied by my radius, which is 6. So pi times 6 squared. Again, not expected to know that. So shift and then pi, going to multiply it by 6 squared. Going to get an answer of 113.097. So 113.097. If you can just about see that, that's the area of my circle. So what we're going to look to do is the area of my square is 144. The area of the circle is 113.097, which means if we're going to work out what the shaded region is, all I need to do is subtract the area of my circle from the area of the square. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 144, take away those values, and I've got 30.90 centimeters squared. So what I've done, found the area of the square, used the information to work out what the radius is, and then taken those away. So at first glance, it looks like a tricky question, but if I break it down, I can see that I've got all the values that I need. So we've got this standard area of a circle, we're working back, and we've got sort of a contextual question there that sort of applies it a little bit more. So covered quite a few examples there. And what I'll do is I'll leave you with some to try. So if I scroll out for you, just zoom out. I will leave you with these questions to have a little look at, to take away and to try, and just to see how you get on. So the first one, standard area of a circle question. Another one wants you to work back. It says calculate the radius and the diameter. Well, once you know the radius, it's fairly straightforward to find the diameter. And then a semicircle. A little bit more tricky, but if you look at the circle, you can give out what you need to do. Just be careful. That should definitely say calculate. Okay, so have a little try of those.